The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to go on the mat. The Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
Welcome to On the Mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, alongside the pride of Williams, Iowa, Andy Hamilton, and it happens to be in Hamilton County. How great is that?
It's pretty great, Kyle.
I know.
It's awesome.
How it worked out. They named a county after you. That has to be special for you to have a legacy that's going to last.
Yeah, I'm sure that I had a great influence in that, right?
Can you still name all 99 counties? I heard you had that.
I don't know if I can. I can't right now. We don't have time for that.
Well,
right?
I know we are going to have you do it.
We got a great guest today.
Do. This is fun. We have Shane Sparks of the Big Ten Network, also of Trackwrestling.com, on the line with us. How are you, Shane?
Doing fantastic, gentlemen. How are you guys?
We're doing good. We got to do some house cleaning first. Your real name's Shane Nebel. Why are you Shane Sparks?
Yeah, so my real last name, it's pronounced Nabel, but it's spelled N-E-B-L. So real long story short, I used to do a sports talk show, and the first time that they brought me in, a guy named Jim Caston, he had been in the Fox Cities for about 20 years, kind of a legendary sportscaster in the Fox Cities, about a half an hour south of Green Bay, and I walked in, and he said, "Hey, we got a new guy, and what's your name?" I said, "Shane." He goes, "What's your last name?" I go, "Nabel." He goes, "Nope, you're Shane Sparks." And that was it. That was the end of it. It was about a 20-second conversation, and it sounds better, rolls off the tongue a little bit easier, so I decided to stick with it, and the rest is history, as they say.
Your energy is legendary. Have you always had this spark? Do you always go fast and furious?
Yeah, I've always been pretty intense, although I would tell you this. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about me is I'm not always that fired up. I mean, I love to sit back and lay on the couch and watch some football, baseball, wrestling, whatever it is. But, when the lights go on, I just have a passion for what I do. And I actually try to tone it down. I love doing, work on Big Ten Network. And quite often they tell me just, try to bring it back. And the joke is right before we go on the air, we talk about, they want me to think about those animal commercials with the puppies that are in trouble. So that's what we think about. And I don't know if it works, but, I try to think about some of those commercials you see on TV with, whatever it takes just to try to bring the energy down. So I try to bring it down a little bit, but I always tell people when you're in the environments that I'm fortunate enough to be in, it's really hard. I mean, it's exciting. I mean, you're seeing the best college wrestling in the country. I mean, it's hard not to be jacked up about stuff like that.
Both you and Andy were in Paris for the World Championships. Our chance to talk to both of you about that experience. But Andy wants me to make sure I ask about the orange juice and how fantastic it was. Did I lose you there, Shane?
You lost me for a little bit. I'm back now. I'm actually on a landline.
Okay. Well, we were just asking about the orange juice in Paris. And I don't know if...
Are you there, Kyle?
Yeah, we have you. I don't know if you hear any of my questions there, Shane. If you're a landline, I would think we're going to get through to you. If not, Andy and I will talk about it here. You have the orange juice story. Just fill us in a little bit.
Well, I went down to breakfast the first day at our hotel right across the street from the arena and had the orange juice. And I've never had orange juice like this in my entire life, Kyle. And I went to Shane and I told him, I asked him, have you had the orange juice? And I told him, I'm like, it is life changing. And he's like, what do you mean it's life changing? It's orange juice. And he went down, tried it the next day, and he told me, you know what? It's life-changing. And it was fresh squeezed. They had the oranges. They dropped down through the machine. You watched it squeeze the juice right out in front of you. And, wouldn't you know, like about 4 or 5 days into the trip, somebody broke the orange juice machine. And it was kind of a devastating development in our trip there. But we got through it.
Well, we haven't had a chance to talk with you or Shane, if we're able to get Shane back on the line. But just want to get your thoughts on the World Championships. Historic moment with it coming down to Kyle Snyder, and he wrestled Sedulayev in the finals, and Sedulayev bumps up, both three-time world and Olympic champions now. If you have to put it in the scope of where this really is on the history scale, How do you view this historically?
Well, my scope in wrestling is limited after, beyond 20 years ago.
Right.
I know a little bit, but I really started getting into it 20 years ago when I started covering it, and nothing I've seen like that. When you think of everything that's on the line, I mean, the tournament itself was incredible. It comes down, the team race comes down to the last match, and you got two iconic wrestlers. I mean, guys that have accomplished more before the age of 21 than just about anybody in the sport's history, and such a highly anticipated match, and just fireworks from the get-go. I mean, Snyder comes out, super aggressive, maybe a little bit over-aggressive, and gets taken down, and fights back, and it was just a back and forth battle all the way down to the last 25 seconds when Kyle scored on the on the go behind, and Sadulayev was pretty much cooked from that point forward. The hand fighting that Snyder put him through just wore him out. But man, what a fantastic environment, and something I will never forget. Did you get chills when you saw it? Was it an emotional moment? The whole thing to me was like, man, how blessed am I to be here to see this in person, and to see, ran around the back and got to see Sadulayev walking off, dejected, and 10 feet behind him, Kyle Snyder, getting mopped by, American coaches and teammates and support staff. And, that celebration went on for 15 minutes, and it was pretty cool to be there. Pretty special. We're talking about the World Championships with Andy Hamilton of Trackwrestling.com, who was there to witness all of it. And when you think about what transpired, and you have such a high moment with the men's freestyle team, women had a competent performance and getting second place. Greco-Roman, where does that fit right now? I know there's some good things happening in the junior level. Do we see in the next 5 years those juniors are going to cycle through and we're going to have some success again with the Greco? They got a lot of work to do, and that's where it starts, is the grassroots program. And Kamal Bey, junior world champion, and not just a junior world champion, but a guy that scored, I think, 61 points in the Junior World Championships. Nobody else in the entire tournament scored more than 44. There is no question who the most entertaining guy was in Greco-Roman in Finland, and Kamal Bey was that guy, and just super entertaining matches, high flying, high scoring, a guy that can make Greco-Roman in the United States cool, and that's a key part of it. I mean, you see a lot of guys wrestling Greco now, and they're low scoring and frankly boring matches. Yeah. At the World Championships, there were, the guys that were entertaining were few and far between. And in order for Greco to become popular in this country, in my opinion, you have to have more Kamal Beys. So that's where it starts. They've got a guy that can become the face of the franchise. Colton Schultz going to Greece, following that up with a Cadet World Championship. I mean, you're talking about guys that won tournaments that hadn't been won by Americans in, 18, 20 years. So those are hugely positive steps. Now it's going to take a little time. It's going to take some guys in the developmental system, like we saw in the freestyle program. You look back to where the freestyle program was a decade ago, and it was in rough shape. And you got Jordan Burroughs to come along and be the leader of the program. And then guys coming up through the developmental system like Kyle Snyder, Thomas Gilman, Zane Rutherford, Logan Stieber, Jaden Cox, so on and so forth. And now we're reaping the rewards of those seeds that were sown about a decade ago with the developmental system. So that's kind of where Greco's at. It's going to take some time, and it's also going to take, some people that buy in all the way, like Kamal Bey has. And Colton Schultz, as I mentioned, Cadet World Champion, he's going to have some options of whether, a lot of options folk style wise, whether he wants to go to college and wrestle in the college, collegiate system. It's probably going to take some guys that are all in Greco, for, the long haul. Before we switch over to the collegiate scene, I want you to tell me about someone at the cadets. You actually pulled me into the office and you said you got
watch this guy. I want you to fill in our listeners on who this guy is and why we should watch him wrestle.
Yeah, Aaron Brooks from Maryland. He's going to go to the Olympic Training Center next year, and then he'll go the college route after that. But, a guy that I watched a little bit prior to Athens, but he stepped on the mat in Athens, and he was on the mat right in front of me and wrestled a Georgian. And I have never seen a kid that age that's that talented, that athletic, that skilled, that goes that hard. He broke this guy in a minute and a half. And I mean, the pace was just out of this world. And he's got so many ways that he can score. And I turned to one of the guys sitting next to me in Athens, and, after that first match, and he won 14-2, 14 points in a minute and a half. The 2 points that the Georgian scored were actually like a shin whizzer, what they call out in Pennsylvania, a Jonesy position. You rarely see it in freestyle. And because you rarely see it in freestyle, they called it 2-2. The official was so confused, on what it was. He hit that move later in the tournament, and they called it right. It was totally Brooks's move that created the exposure, and they called it right later in the tournament, but they got it wrong the first time and called it 2-2. But otherwise, it's 14-2. And I turned to one of the guys sitting next to me, and I said, I don't know who else is in this tournament, but they're going to be really hard pressed to beat this guy. And he rolled through the bracket. The closest match was in the finals, I think a 13-7 match against a Russian. And, Aaron was in complete control of that match. He gave away some points late in the bout, but, man, he was really fun to watch.
And he didn't even win the Cadet World Team Trial.
Yeah, that's the best, the funniest part about it is he didn't even make the team when the team was decided. Travis Whitlake, who was a bronze medalist at last year's Cadet Worlds, was the guy that beat Aaron Brooks in the finals of the best of three out in Akron. And then Whitlake suffered, I think, an ankle injury down at the junior duels in Oklahoma, and Aaron Brooks was ready to go when his number was called.
Make sure you stick around. We have a guest after this. Mark Perry, head wrestling coach for the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, will be on for 2 segments. Very excited to talk to him about the World Championships and his view of what's happening with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. Stick around for that. We are talking with Andy Hamilton in studio right now about the World Championships. Let's phase over to the collegiate season. You just had a great report on trackwrestling.com story about the possible change in the collegiate season. And I'm excited about this because I think it's very much needed. I want to see us transition into a situation where we have more dual meets that matter. Is this really going to happen?
The coaches that I've talked to, Tom Ryan said that there's more momentum for this now than there's been in 25 years. Troy Nickerson said, he said, I think it's going to happen. It's just a matter of, is it going to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? He goes, but I'm pretty confident that it will happen in time. They're talking about taking wrestling away from being a 2-semester sport, making it a second semester only sport, and then putting a dual meet championship on the end of the season, leaving the NCAA championships where they are. And after the NCAA championships in March, there'll be about 4 to 5 weeks of dual competition, and culminating with a 16-team dual meet championship. Now, it's got to go through a lot of vetting, and there are a lot of hoops that they still have to go through to make it happen. But I think that they're onto something here. I think there are a lot of powerful people that are behind this. Bob Bowlesby, Waterloo's own Bob Bowlesby. Yeah. One of the driving forces behind this. He's one of the guys on the Blue Ribbon Task Force that unanimously recommended this. That task force was put into place to a couple years ago, put into place to examine the sport's long-term health and kind of give wrestling a plan going forward for how to strengthen itself for the long haul at the Division I level. And I think one of the main forces behind this, one of the main reasons behind this is, as I mentioned, trying to get it to 1 semester, where you look at it now and athletes are forced kind of to deal with midterms the first semester and finals the first semester and then midterms the second semester. There aren't a whole lot of NCAA sports that are spanned out over 2 semesters as it is. And they think that, academic performance will be enhanced if they can get it to 1 semester.
And I think it's a positive that we move in that direction. It always has made sense to me to start with the Midlands or the Southern Scuffle, make that the start of the season, and then just evolve from there. I think that's a real positive for the sport.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things to me, in going back about 4 or 5 years ago when we were at, the national duels up in Minneapolis, and wrestling people have always talked about trying to get wrestling away from March Madness. And to me, a larger issue is getting wrestling away from wrestling, because you go back 4 or 5 years, whatever it was. I think it was 2012 or 13 when the NWCA national duels were up in Minneapolis. There were 2,200 people in the stands for Minnesota, Oklahoma State in the finals. And the reason for that was because it was the same weekend as Minnesota State high school qualifying tournaments. What would be the district tournaments in Iowa were going on the same time. So wrestling's going head-to-head against wrestling. And, there frankly weren't that many people in the stands for a marquee college event. Now, if we can get wrestling away from wrestling a little bit more, what's going to happen to dual attendance on college campuses when you can bring in high school wrestlers, high school coaches, high school wrestling parents, in April when they're not having to worry about on a Friday night getting ready to compete the next day, or they're not competing that day. I think there are a lot of positives that can happen because of this, and I just like the fact that people in the sport are willing to take some chances here.
Yeah,
that they've studied it and they're not willing to stand pat.
And what you're saying there too, it was a head scratcher when you see North Carolina wrestling UNI on a Monday, but maybe that's a positive. Maybe this allows the floodgates to open a little bit and you get more attendance on a Monday night. Maybe this is something that we can at least experiment with through trial and error and see that we're getting away from wrestling, because UNI, as an example, I think they're wrestling Missouri the day of the finals of the state wrestling championships. I think that's something, and so that's a tough thing to go against when you have the premier event in our state as the state wrestling tournament. You really can't battle that. So we'll see how that materializes. Sorry we couldn't get Shane Sparks on the line here. Just didn't have the opportunity to get that connected. I think you said too that sometimes his service is spotty up there, but he said he was on a landline. So
I'm going to tell him that he's got to want it more.
He does.
Want it more.
I'm disappointed, but I'm excited about who we have. You've known Mark Perry for a long time. This is going to be a fun interview with him and get a chance to pick his brain and a new role he has with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, coming from an associate head coaching role at Illinois. This is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, he's a guy that you can talk to for hours about wrestling, right? I mean, so many different parts of the Mark Perry story, whether you want to talk about the Perry Smith family and that. His collegiate career, his time at Blair Academy, his, all of his stops along the way that have led him back to Iowa. Just, a guy that loves to talk wrestling.
He does. And we get to talk wrestling with Hawkeye Wrestling Club head coach Mark Perry is next on the mat.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When all you want is sports, all you need is 1650 The Fan.
We are back on the mat. 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, in studio with Andy Hamilton. Our one and only guest today, Mark Perry, two-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Iowa, and is now the new head wrestling coach of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. And going way back, when you look at the history of someone who has been in the sport, Mark Perry went to Blair Academy. You have been at Nebraska with your dad. You are the nephew of John Smith, head wrestling coach at Oklahoma State. You've been to Cal Poly. You've been at Penn State. You were an assistant coach at Illinois. As you think of those experiences, Mark, do you feel like that really gives you a unique segment in the sport of wrestling to especially fill this role of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club head coach?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've been surrounded by the best, and everything I've learned, I try to pass on. I mean, that's part of being a coach, and I've definitely had some unbelievable mentors and people, to learn from, from basically the very beginning.
Why was this the right fit for you to switch from Illinois to take a coaching job that's not necessarily in college wrestling, but you're part of functioning for the University of Iowa wrestling program? Why was this the right fit for you?
I mean, you know, in 2013, after the 2012 Olympics, I knew that for Illinois to be successful, we were going to have one of the best regional training centers in the country. So, you know, I started a training center there, and I brought in several guys. And, you know, that first year was pretty rough. I probably didn't respect the next level, you know, as much as you should, and it didn't go too well, you know. So I got pretty invested in, you know, figuring out the game and figuring out what you had to do to be the best in the world. And, you know, started training guys, and we started having more and more success. You know, we had a couple guys. We had a couple different guys beat 3 Olympic champions and several world champions and world medalists. It was just, you know, it was fun. It was fun figuring out different cultures of the world, of how they train, how they eat, you know, the preparation, and kind of figuring out their systems and the way that they think, and trying to take these guys out. It was almost like a chess match. So I enjoyed that process. I felt like it was obviously a little bit more challenging than figuring out a college kid. You know, and one thing led to another. Here I am.
How did you get to this point? How did this transpire? Did Tom Brands approach you?
Yeah, they approached me in the spring, and, you know, I didn't have to think too hard about it. You know, I thought that, you know, being back home, basically, you know, and being around a mentors like Tom and Terry, and, you know, to just really the whole program as a whole, I was excited to come back and do my part to try to help the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, you know, get to the top of the world.
You've always been an advocate for Iowa wrestling, even though you grew up in Oklahoma State wrestling. Why has it been that you have really seen that Iowa wrestling has a flavor that's different than any other in the country?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of the reason why I'm coming back is I want to, you know, see the sport of wrestling, you know, kind of take that next jump. And, you know, I don't know how you word it, but basically where there's, you know, opportunities and, you know, the next level, we just call it the Olympics, but it's really our pros, it's the big boys. And I've always kind of felt like the state treated wrestling like that. You know, they treated it as its, you know, prize jewel, as its prize sport, you know, where you have in other countries, national sports, you know, where they're treated like, you know, the stars of their community. And from my experiences from a very young age of being in Iowa, coming to the NCAA tournament in Oklahoma State colors, and through high school, coming to the NCAA tournament and then competing, you know, for the Hawkeyes, it's never changed. You know, if they love you or hate you, you know, based off a result. And, you know, I mean, there's always the love there, but if you're not winning, they're not happy about it, and that's how it should be. You know, that's how it should be. That shows that there's passion, and there's a level of passion, you know, from the fans and like I said, the people in the state where they want, you know, they want to see the Hawkeyes and the guys at the Olympic level at the top. You know, they don't want to see them sitting second, third. That to me, that's pretty special.
Was it missing in Oklahoma then? What was the vibe like when you were in Oklahoma? Did they not have that flavor at all?
No, actually, they were on, you know, right when I went to Blair, they went on that run, you know, so it's not necessarily that it was missing. For one is, I mean, I would say high school wrestling was a little bit down, you know, when I was there, when I was in 8th, 9th, 10th grade. It was a little bit down compared to when I was growing up. And it's just I guess the community, it's been marketed better in the recent years and become bigger and more. I mean, last year I think they had their best years as far as crowds go. Versus, I want to say the Iowa Dome might have been down there. I know the National Bulls were down there. They had some great crowds, but it was different. I always thought that Iowa and Oklahoma State might have been like equal in that area as far as passion throughout the state. And as I grew up, it's just a little bit different. Nothing to take away from the state of Oklahoma, and I only wish to see it grow more and more with OU getting a new staff down there and John revamping his staff. But there's just something different about it here. I can't really explain it. It's just that's why I call it the Mecca of wrestling.
We are on the mat with Mark Perry, head wrestling coach of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. Andy, you got anything?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Mark, a couple of your former pupils at the college ranks, Jesse Delgado, Boris Nabachkov, have joined the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. What are they going to bring to the program?
I think they bring a lot to the program. Like anyone, just like myself, you kind of reinsert yourself. It's a little bit of adjustment. The commitment level is at a high level, and not that it wasn't at that place as I've been before. It's just, again, it's hard to explain. It's just when people are coming to work, they're coming to work, and I don't want to necessarily say, it's not fun or it's not enjoyable or this and that, but when you come here, you know what you're here to do, and those guys coming here, Jesse, it's coming to work. It's not coming to play. It's coming to try to be the best in the world. And when you have training situations like he does in the lightweight, it's definitely a wake up call for all of us. But I think they're going to thrive in this atmosphere. As they continue to adjust and get used to the regiment, and vice versa. I think the guys in the club that get the opportunity to train alongside those guys and the guys in the college program that they rub elbows with, those are two great mentors. Stylistically, it's kind of, I guess you could say, one's definitely European style, and one's definitely more of like an Oklahoma State style. So, getting that feel, I think, is an unbelievable opportunity for, everybody involved in the program. I mean, I think that's huge. I mean, I can't even explain how important I think that is for those guys to have that. Jesse's one of the fastest guys in the world, if not, as far as fast twitch speed, maybe not as explosive speed, but there's a little bit of a difference in those speeds. But when it comes to that fast twitch kind of John Smith speed, he's right up there at the top, and that's an awesome advantage for guys throughout the program to feel. And Boris is just fun to wrestle. When I was at Illinois, he played a huge impact in Jesse Delgado and Isaiah Martinez and several other guys that became All-American and NCAA high caliber wrestlers' careers. He did the same thing for his teammates back at Cal Poly. He's just a phenomenal wrestler. And he just has a different feel. He's one of the best technicians in the world, pound for pound. And now it's time to kind of cement what he wants to do on that world stage and, become a world champion.
You are adding a female wrestling component. You have two female athletes with Lauren Louise and Allie Reagan. How are you going to bolster the female part of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club?
Say that again?
Well, you have two female athletes in the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. How are you going to continue to develop that aspect of the HWC?
We're going to just, try to build off of it towards 2020. Get people invested in the program that, care about the Iowa program, the Iowa men's freestyle program, and the women's program, both people in the state of Iowa and throughout the nation. It's an opportunity for women to train in an atmosphere that is second to none. I think it's if you're a fan of women's wrestling, or that this is a special thing going on here. So I think it's going to thrive. I don't think we're hurting for, people wanting that opportunity. We just have to continue to, raise funds and build this thing up and be able to bring in, more and more women. But we love having them. They work their butt off just like, the men, and we expect the same thing. We expect to be at the top of the podium. Allie fell a little bit short last year. She ended up second, but there was a gap in that final match. And that gap has to be closed, and it doesn't have to be closed, it has to be taken out. So there's work to be done, but I love working with them. They're respectful, and they're here for business. They're professionals at this level. You have to be a professional, and they love what they do. They enjoy, the process, and they're no different than the men. Like I said, is they're coming to work to get better. They're focused on their life outside of wrestling, as far as like nutrition and sleep patterns, and they're on a mission.
Yeah, Mark, this weekend, obviously the U23 World Team Trials up in Rochester. Something new that United World Wrestling is introducing this year, and presents some interesting decisions for college coaches with the start of college practices next week, and the World Championship event being over Thanksgiving week. To my knowledge, you guys are just sending Sam Brooks and Alex Meyer, correct?
Yeah. It would have been nice if we probably had another month. Corey Clark's going to be competing in Canada the week of the show, November 4th, kind of as a pre-tournament, get himself ready for the season. But he qualified for that as well, but he's not quite, he's back on the mat, he's going live, he's scrapping, but he's just getting his process started. So right now we have just Myers and Sammy Brooks going up.
Did you guys give much thought to sending any of the college guys? Because you guys got a couple guys in there that could potentially make the team.
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't really talk about it too much. If someone would have came up, it just, the way that the summer and the fall has gone, kind of know who have, where guys' goals are and where their eyes are set. Obviously Spencer Reed's a big freestyler. He didn't go for the junior trials because he was coming off surgery. So, he kind of was in the same boat as Clark. Like, I could have seen him possibly been thinking about it, especially at the beginning of a potential redshirt year. And obviously Corey Clark. A lot of guys did. It just, timing. It's a weird time. It's definitely a weird time, and it didn't make sense for the rest of the guys right now that they got things they're focused on. This program wants to get back to the top, and they got business to take care of.
Do you like the concept of the U23? Do you think it's good to have that? It seems like another addition to the international form. Is this going to be good for the Americans?
I think it is. I think it is. I think college coaches, it's about winning the NCAA championships. And if your athletes, get an opportunity to represent their country, it's not easy to make a world team. And it doesn't matter if that's a cadet or it's a junior or a senior university, U23 or, world team. It's hard. Some of these guys that make junior and cadet will never make the senior team. Some of these guys that made senior teams never made a cadet or junior. So anytime these, to me, it's all about the athletes. Anytime they get an opportunity to do something that special, that's a memory that they're going to cherish for a long time. Anytime there's opportunity for wrestling, I think it's a bonus in my eyes.
And then Alex Myers going Greco, is that right?
Yeah, he's been training in the Hawkeye Wrestling Club with Rut and, several of the guys that, have some Greco knowledge and Greco background, and he's ready to scrap this weekend. It'll be fun for him.
Now, do you get on the mat? Do you train with them a little bit, go live?
I spar and stuff. I'm getting healthier. The resources here have been a blessing for me, and, starting to get my body back to normal. Every now and then I'll give guys one shot. I got one match for me. I'll go balls to the wall. And then, I might be locked out a little bit in the neck and the hips, but I'm getting healthier. That's the plan. I'm all good with the 57 and 60 kilo guy. But once it starts getting up to the big boys, I don't want no part of that.
So if you have one solid match and you saying Andy Hamilton would win a best out of 3 with you?
He's got a pretty good chance. He's got heavy hands.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think he would wear you down in that third match. It would be pretty ugly.
Yeah. If he's got heavy hands and a good jab, I'm in deep trouble.
All right, we got to close out this segment. We will be back with more Mark Perry next on the mat.
Log on and listen online at 1650thefan.com, the online home of 1650 The Fan.
We are back on the mat, 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, along with Andy Hamilton of Trackwrestling.com. We are on the line with Mark Perry. Mark, two-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Iowa. Now he's the head wrestling coach for the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. And your career pretty much ended as a Hawkeye. I think a lot of people probably wonder why you didn't carry on with international wrestling. What were the reasons behind that, Mark?
It's probably my maturity level. It's kind of the way I handle things. Obviously, I look back and kind of regret it. But, if things work out, how I hope with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, maybe it's all blessing in disguise. I just, coming out of college, I had, obviously, a really beat up knee, my senior year, but, had some neck issues and I didn't take care of my body the right way, and that's 100% on me. And, I knew that the level of commitment I had to put to my rehab to get back, was going to be longer than 3 or 4 months. And it was in 2008, so not being able to participate in the Olympic trials in 2008 when I felt like, I had an opportunity to be right up there in the mix to make the team. My head just didn't, I wasn't thinking right, and I got a great opportunity to go coach at Penn State, and I decided to go that route of coaching, and the rest is history, really.
You're coming up on 10 years since you've competed, and 10 years in coaching. If you could go back now and tell yourself what you know now, what you didn't know then, what would you tell yourself from 10 years ago?
I think the thing is the things. Obviously I've learned a ton of skill. I've learned a lot of wrestling, studying the international level. I never competed as far as understanding kind of the systems and the opponents and the head position and the mindset and just how they prepare and everything. I feel like I'm as good as anybody there. I've really done my homework and I enjoy that part. So I was always pretty good at that. It would really come back to, like I said, the things that Brands used to preach, just that consistency of, like I was just saying with my rehab, the consistency of, my preparation where it wasn't in segments, it was consistent, and living that lifestyle. I mean, that would have been really the difference. I think of taking care of, you have to work just as hard. The older you get, you got to work just as hard on the recovery and taking care of your body and the nutrition aspect as the wrestling. The wrestling was never hard for me, and it's not hard for a lot of these young talent I got. It's putting all the pieces together. And again, that's a big thing that drew me back here is I knew I needed that element in my life, for myself, not only for the athletes, that I getting the opportunity to work with, but for myself. So things I knew, and I think a lot of these young kids know at Iowa that might go through the same things, or a lot of these kids know it doesn't matter at Cal Poly or Penn State or, Illinois. And we all know it, we all hear it, but there's a difference in doing it. And, you know, like I said, I did do it, but I did it in segments instead of being consistent, you know, and I think that's the difference you see in a guy, for instance, like, you know, right now on the scene, like a Kyle Snyder. The difference in him and, you know, these college guys that are also at the top, but some of the others are right there, obviously not having the same level of success, excuse me, is his consistency and his preparation has, it's remarkable. You know, he's been living the way I'm talking since long as I can remember meeting him when he was a young kid. So I think that, you know, that's an important element to the game. And, you know, I see that a lot in these college guys and these international guys here at Iowa. So I'm real happy to be a part of that and continue to help the Brands brothers, you know, push how important that is, you know, push how important that is from my lessons and, as an athlete and my lessons from a coach.
Obviously a huge summer for Thomas Gilman to not only make the world team, but to make the world finals. What does that do for the Hawkeye Wrestling Club moving forward?
I just think, you know, Thomas Gilman he's one of those guys that I basically just described. And he's been doing that and living the right way for, you know, quite a while. And to see it translate over, you know, and him have immediate success, and not the success that we prepared for, but, you know, relatively good success, you know, for a kid coming out of college. I think it just confirms everything that the Brands are doing and the Hawkeye Wrestling Club's doing, and, you know, adding me that extra element. Everything just seems to be meshing and going real well. So, you know, Thomas Gilman is kind of the, you know, the face of the program of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club right now after his performance. And we have plenty of guys that are pushing, you know, for that spot. So I think it just excites everyone else that's living that way, that, you know, I can be that guy too. And, it's a great, you know, there's great things happening down in Iowa City for sure.
We are on the mat with Mark Perry, head wrestling coach of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. Mark was an NCAA champion for the University of Iowa twice. We are talking Hawkeye Wrestling Club. We're also going to talk about your former coach. You were coached by Tom Brands and Jim Zaleski, but now you are with Tom Brands in the coaching capacity. How has your relationship changed since you were coached by Tom Brands and now that you get to work with him? How has that changed since then?
It's changed in several ways. I think the biggest is probably I'm a lot more mature, you know, than when I was an athlete. So I'm as dialed in and as focused as anyone here about doing my part to help this program continue to grow. But I mean, I still kind of look at him, you know, as not necessarily as a coach, as a colleague, but I look at him as a mentor. And I know where his heart and his mind and his, you know, his body and soul are. So I'm just following his lead, and we're continuing to build. You know, we're on a mission, just like I said, several of these athletes are. And I'm glad to be on his side.
Why did you lack some maturity in college?
I think probably just maybe setting my goals too low. You know, not necessarily too low. I wanted to be undefeated and not give up a takedown. You know, so my low. I think more of just kind of setting that barrier to what was right in front of me, and to maybe what you know my God-given ability was. You know, if that goal was, I remember. Kind of a short story. I remember Coach Brands one time, you know, he was fired up one day talking about, you know, we got to get ready for the Russians and Iranians and the Turks. And, you know, back then the European names were going through my head, like Satiev and this and that. And I just, in my head, I'm thinking, well, they're not going to be at the NCAAs, you know, and I just think not really understanding of, you know, I need to be preparing to be the best in the world, not, you know, the best in my age group or in the college. And listen, a lot of the best guys in the world are in that age group. It's just, you kind of set my mind to what's the competition instead of, really, really trying to limit my potential, I would say.
You had an opportunity to work with Dan Gable in a different capacity. Would you have been an NCAA champion without the influence of Dan Gable, especially that senior year?
I would like to say I would, but I know the impact, and I'll forever be grateful, for everybody I've had the opportunity to work with. But, really I was dealing with, my neck and knee injuries, and my mindset probably, I definitely wasn't thinking, like I said, about, wrestling to my full potential. It was more survival mode. So, having a guy like him and Coach Brands really gear me to get my mind right, to compete to the best of my ability, no matter the circumstances. The influence that, those coaches had on me was probably the difference maker, but my stubborn side wants to say I could have done it, by myself. But without those guys, I probably would have, who knows, folded ship and packed up and left, I wasn't probably in the greatest state of mind, but, they're the best at that. They're the best on the planet, and Coach Gable's probably the best coach of all time, so anytime, again, you have an opportunity to be mentored by someone like him, it's just kind of speechless with the, how important that is to me, memory-wise, and just having that opportunity. And it's probably helped me more as a coach than it even did as an athlete, because those lessons are, what I try to pass on to the next generation.
How do you flip that switch? Because you were a one-time Big Ten champion, and then you parlayed that into success at the national tournament. Every time you just turned it on and you knew how to wrestle at the NCAA championships. Take us through that trigger and what it's like to really be able to pull through at the national tournament.
Growing up, obviously I was an avid Oklahoma State fan, and they were always ranked number one, or a heavy favorite or a slight underdog heading into the NCAA tournament. And I think, for whatever reason, Iowa would always come through in the Gable era, and those guys would win. And it was kind of that aura, that magical feeling that I felt in the air when I was a young kid at the NCAA tournament. I just said, I'm going to grab that magic. I always did when I was growing up. Like, no matter what happens throughout the season, again, no matter how I feel, no matter how my body, when that time rolls around in that 3 days, that magic's going to be mine. And, I am going to wrestle to my, potential at that tournament. I just wish, the process leading up, I could have switched my mind to thinking that way as well. And maybe I would have reached higher heights, but it was just, I think through all the experiences, I just said, I'm going to be the guy, I'm going to be the guy that, that runs the show, or, that shocks the country. I'm going to be the performer. I'm not going to let pressure and those things get in the way. And I always felt free at the national tournament. I had prepared for it so many times in my head, saying, basically telling myself what I just mentioned. And when I was there, I felt free, and I always performed, to my max potential at that tournament.
We have been talking with Mark Perry, head wrestling coach of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. We appreciate you coming on the program. If there's an 0-30 classification, I'd like you and Andy to compete against each other in that best of three. Maybe we can get that together at Carver Hawkeye Arena.
I want no part of that.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. All the best with the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. We're excited that you have this opportunity, and we look forward to see what the Hawkeyes are going to do in the coming years.
Well, thank you. It's going to be fun. We're building day by day, and I'm just glad to be back in Iowa, and like I said, doing my part to help us get back to the top.
All right, we appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right, thank you.
All right, that was Mark Perry, head wrestling coach of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. You've had an opportunity to talk a lot with Mark Perry over the years. Really captures who Mark is and the insight that he has that's unique from anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lots of cool stuff there, right? I mean, just his interesting perspective that he has on so many different things. And like I said, we could fill a lot of segments with Mark Perry on the line, right?
I know, it's fun because you do get that insight, and just even listening to him and just kind of the thought process that he has, that he had the ability to say, I saw this at Oklahoma State and I don't want that to happen, especially at a young age. Not many people have the foresight to be able to do that. And when you talk about maturity, he talked about that a lot in the interview, but while he said he was immature in some areas, he was light years ahead of other people in other areas. And you probably saw that a lot at the University of Iowa.
Yeah, one of the most unique athletes that I've ever covered. Just his perspective on things, and certainly you could tell that, even back then he was thinking about coaching and how he would handle certain things. And I remember his senior year about him talking about getting out of wrestling altogether, wanting to go into the FBI or the Secret Service. And I thought, man, this guy was put on this earth to coach wrestling. So I'm glad that he's in it. I'm glad he stayed in it, and certainly glad that he's going to be working with guys here in the state of Iowa trying to win world and Olympic titles.
If you had to predict, we have 30 seconds. Will he be Iowa's next coach after Tom Brands?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, I think he's certainly on a short list, right? I mean, you got to think that this move puts him in position to be on that list.
Yeah, be interesting to see. Hope everyone goes to U23s. I know Track Wrestling is going to have the coverage for the U23s out of Rochester. If you can't make it down there, make sure to check out trackwrestling.com. For Andy Hamilton and Mark Perry, you've been listening to On the Mat on 1650 The Fan.
You've been listening to On the Mat, the Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.